Saudi boxing. In the early 2020s, many of boxing's biggest fights began taking place in a location that had rarely hosted major bouts before. The first major Saudi boxing event came in September 2018, when George Groves fought Callum Smith in Jeddah in the World Boxing Super Series final. Smith stopped Groves in the 7th round to win the WBA super middleweight title. At that point, Saudi Arabia was hosting a single high-level title fight, not yet functioning as a regular stop for the sport. By February 2023, Saudi Arabia was no longer hosting only title fights. Jake Paul fought Tommy Fury in Diriyah, and Fury handed Paul the first loss of his boxing career by split decision. The fight brought a large crossover audience and showed that Saudi-hosted cards could now attract attention well beyond traditional boxing fans. By the end of 2023, the format changed again. Riyadh hosted a card built around separate heavyweight bouts for Anthony Joshua and Deontay Wilder, with the idea that both could move toward a future fight. Instead, Joseph Parker beat Wilder by unanimous decision at Kingdom Arena. Saudi cards were now gathering several major heavyweights on the same event, rather than relying on one main fight. In 2024, the stakes rose again. Anthony Joshua knocked out Francis Ngannou in the 2nd round in Riyadh after dropping him 3 times. 2 months later, Tyson Fury fought Alexander Usyk there for the undisputed heavyweight championship, and Usyk won a split decision to become the first boxer to hold all 4 major heavyweight belts at once, and the first undisputed heavyweight champion since Lennox Lewis in 2000. Soviet system. By the late 2000s, some of boxing's best fighters were using a style that looks strikingly similar. They controlled distance carefully, kept exchanges short, took the center without wasting punches, and made opponents reset over and over. That pattern showed up across multiple champions from the former Soviet system, and it started to change how top-level boxing looked. Alexander Usyk was one of the clearest examples. He had already won Olympic gold in 2012, but the stronger proof came in the professional ring. In July 2018, he fought Murat Gassiev in the World Boxing Super Series final with the unified cruiserweight championship at stake. Gassiev entered unbeaten and brought real knockout power, but Usyk did not fight him with pressure or single-shot power. He controlled range, stepped out after combinations, and kept changing angles until Gassiev spent long stretches following him without setting his feet. Usyk won a unanimous decision and unified the cruiserweight division. Dmitry Bivol applied the same style in a different way. In March 2018, he dominated Sullivan Barrera at Madison Square Garden. He used his jab, foot placement, and timing to hold the fight at the exact distance he wanted. Barrera kept trying to close range, but Bivol kept meeting him with straight punches and small adjustments in position. The fight was less dramatic than a knockout war, but it showed the same basic idea: win the ground first, then win the exchange. That is why the Soviet system mattered. It was not one fighter having a good style. It was a repeatable method producing elite boxers who controlled fights with distance, balance, and positioning. Mayweather model. By the late 2000s, Floyd Mayweather had become the clearest example of a boxer using star power as business leverage. The fights were not only about titles or rankings, they were built around his ability to sell the event, control the negotiation, and take the larger share of the money. That shift could be seen in the size of the events themselves. When Mayweather fought Oscar De La Hoya in 2007, the bout set a pay-per-view record with 2.48 million buys. Mayweather kept pushing that model further. In 2013, he left HBO for a 6-fight deal with Showtime and CBS that gave him even more control over his events. Later that year, his fight with Canelo Alvarez set a boxing pay-per-view revenue record at about $152 million. In 2017, Mayweather pushed the event model even further when he fought Conor McGregor. It was not a normal boxing matchup. McGregor was crossing over from the UFC for his first professional boxing match, but the event was still sold as one of the biggest money fights the sport had seen. Mayweather's disclosed guarantee was $100 million. McGregor's was $30 million. And reports after the fight said Mayweather's total payday could reach about $300 million. In 2018, Canelo Alvarez signed a 5-year, 11-fight deal with DAZN, worth at least $365 million, which was called the richest athlete contract in sports history at the time. That did not mean every later star copied Mayweather exactly, but it showed where the business had moved. At the top of boxing, leverage, guaranteed money, and A-side control now mattered more than before. Tyson boom. By the late 1980s, Mike Tyson had become the kind of fighter people watched even if they did not normally follow boxing. He was young, frightening, and impossible to ignore. Even his ring walk had an edge to it. No robe, no flashy entrance gear, just black trunks. From the opening bell, he threw with bad intentions and often finished fights before viewers had time to settle in. That made heavyweight boxing easier to sell to casual audiences than it had been in years. The breakthrough came fast. In November 1986, Tyson knocked out Trevor Berbick in 2 rounds and became the youngest heavyweight champion in boxing history at age 20. Then the run got bigger. He beat James Smith for the WBA title, outpointed Tony Tucker for the IBF title, and became the first heavyweight to hold the WBC, WBA, and IBF belts at the same time. After that, he stopped Larry Holmes, who had never been knocked out before, and then blew out Michael Spinks in 91 seconds in June 1988. The Spinks fight became one of the biggest events in the sport, grossing around $70 million, with Tyson earning about $22 million. The change was not only about titles and knockouts. Tyson felt larger than boxing because people talked about him even when he was not fighting. He had the Customato story, the voice, the stare, the sudden bursts of violence in the ring, and the sense that anything could happen around him. In 1987, Nintendo released Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, and the game sold in the millions, which put his name in homes far beyond boxing fans. Later, stories about Tyson owning pet tigers only added to the sense that he was not a normal athlete living a normal life. That is why his rise mattered. Tyson turned the heavyweight champion into a mainstream attraction again, and boxing benefited from the size of his presence as much as from the fights themselves. 12 rounds. For decades, world title fights were scheduled for 15 rounds. That changed after one of the darkest nights in boxing. In November 1982, Ray Mancini stopped Kim Duk-Koo in the 14th round of their lightweight title fight in Las Vegas. Kim collapsed soon after, underwent brain surgery, and died 5 days later. The fight was shown on national television in the United States, so the damage was not just felt inside boxing. It became a public shock. The response came quickly. The WBC moved to reduce championship fights from 15 rounds to 12 almost immediately, arguing that the final rounds were where the worst punishment often accumulated. Other sanctioning bodies followed later in the decade, and 12 rounds became the new championship standard. The change was not cosmetic. It altered how title fights were paced. Fighters no longer had the same room to start slowly, give away early rounds, and try to take over late. Trainers had to plan for a shorter championship distance, and the old idea of the championship rounds lost some of its meaning. One of the clearest ways to understand the change is to look at a fight that happened just before the rule shift. When Sugar Ray Leonard stopped Thomas Hearns in the 14th round in 1981, he was behind on the scorecards and needed a late finish. Under a 12-round limit, Hearns likely wins that fight by decision. Four-belt era. For a long time, boxing treated one fighter as the real champion of each division. That started to change as new sanctioning bodies appeared. The WBA emerged from the old National Boxing Association in 1962. The WBC followed in 1963. Then the IBF arrived in 1983, and the WBO was founded in 1988. Each body could name its own champion, which meant the same division could now have several title holders at once. Heavyweight boxing showed the change very clearly. Mike Tyson became the first heavyweight to hold the WBC, WBA, and IBF titles at the same time, which only mattered because those were already being treated as separate championships. Even then, Tyson still had to fight Michael Spinks in 1988 because Spinks was recognized by many fans as the lineal champion. That tells you how messy the picture had already become. Belts mattered, but so did other claims to the championship. Bo won the WBA, WBC, and IBF heavyweight titles, but then refused to face Lennox Lewis and gave up the WBC belt. At a press conference, the belt was thrown into a trash can. After that, Bo was still a heavyweight champion, but not the only one. That moment captured what the sanctioning body era had done to boxing. Titles could be won, split, vacated, and reassigned without settling who the single best fighter in the division actually was. Broadcast era. Before television, most boxing was followed through newspapers, radio, and ticket sales. Fans either went to the arena or heard about the fight after it happened. Television changed that by putting boxing in people's homes on a regular basis. In the late 1940s and 1950s, shows like Gillette Cavalcade of Sports turned boxing into weekly programming. That was the first big media shift. Boxing was no longer only a live event people attended. It became something viewers could watch from home again and again, which kept the sport in front of the public far more often than before. The second shift came when television stopped being just a place to show fights and started turning certain fights into national events. In 1971, Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier fought in what was promoted as the fight of the century. 3 years later, Ali fought George Foreman in Zaire in an event transmitted around the world. Those fights showed that television could do more than carry boxing. It could magnify it. A fight was no longer just a contest in one building. It could become a shared event watched across cities, countries, and time zones. Then the model changed again with pay-per-view. Instead of using boxing mainly to fill weekly television schedules or draw giant broadcast audiences, promoters began selling the biggest fights directly to viewers at premium prices. Holyfield vs. Tyson 2 set a pay-per-view buys record in 1997 with 1.99 million purchases. In 2007, Mayweather vs. De La Hoya broke that mark and generated about $120 million in pay-per-view revenue. That was the third shift. Boxing moved from live gate to regular home television to giant broadcast spectacle, and then to a business where the biggest nights made their money by charging viewers directly at home. Ali era. In 1964, Cassius Clay beat Sonny Liston for the heavyweight title and almost immediately became a different kind of champion. He was 22. He talked more than most fighters, he predicted rounds, and he treated the promotion like part of the fight. Soon after winning the title, he joined the Nation of Islam and changed his name to Muhammad Ali. A heavyweight champion had always been important in boxing. Ali made the role much bigger than boxing. Ali became an even bigger public figure in 1967. He refused induction into the U.S. Army during the Vietnam War, was stripped of the heavyweight title, and lost several prime years of his career. At that point, people were no longer only following him because he was the heavyweight champion. They were following him because he had become a national argument. His fights, his religion, his politics, and his public statements were now all part of the story. When Ali returned, the size of the events around him kept growing. Ali vs. Frazier in 1971 was sold as the fight of the century, and helped show that a boxing match could function like a national event. 3 years later, Ali fought George Foreman in Zaire in The Rumble in the Jungle, a bout shown to enormous audiences around the world. By then, the heavyweight title no longer felt like just a championship. With Ali holding it, the title had become part of global culture. That changed boxing because the heavyweight champion no longer felt like only the best fighter in the division. With Ali, the champion became a worldwide figure people watched, argued about, and attached political meaning to. Weight classes. Boxing changed when the sport started separating fighters by size. Once championships were organized around weight divisions, a boxer no longer had to compete far outside his natural weight to build a name. That opened the sport to more kinds of champions and gave smaller fighters a path to stardom that did not depend on heavyweight boxing. One of the clearest early examples was Henry Armstrong. In 1938, he held world championships in 3 weight divisions at the same time: featherweight, lightweight, and welterweight. That only meant something because the divisions themselves had become major stages inside the sport. A fighter did not have to move all the way to heavyweight to build a historic reputation. He could climb through nearby divisions and still become one of boxing's biggest names. The same change can be seen much later in Manny Pacquiao's career. Pacquiao became famous for winning world titles in 8 weight classes, a record in professional boxing. In 2010, he beat Antonio Margarito for a super welterweight title, even though Margarito outweighed him by 17 pounds. That is part of why Pacquiao's rise felt so unusual. Viewers could follow him from the lower divisions into heavier ones because the sport already had enough recognized classes to make each step matter. That is what weight classes changed. They made boxing broader. A great fighter no longer had to fit one body type or stay in one division forever. The sport could now produce stars at flyweight, lightweight, welterweight, middleweight, and heavyweight, each with a title that carried its own meaning. Queensberry rules. Modern boxing began to take shape when the sport moved away from bare-knuckle prize fighting and adopted a clearer set of written rules. The Queensberry rules, published in 1867, helped define that shift. They required gloves, set rounds at 3 minutes with 1 minute of rest, and established a 10-second count for a knockdown fighter. Those rules did not create boxing from nothing, but they changed the sport from a looser, more chaotic contest into something closer to the version that still exists today.
The difference becomes clear when compared with the older prize-fighting era. Under the London prize ring rules, fights were often bare-knuckle, rounds ended when a fighter went down, and bouts could continue for dozens of rounds. That produced a very different kind of contest. Fighters could wrestle, throw, and fight at a pace built around survival as much as punching. Once gloves and timed rounds became standard, technique had to change. Fighters had to work inside a fixed 3-minute round, manage energy differently, and rely more on sustained punching combinations than on the older rhythm of knockdowns ending each round.
One of the most important long-term effects was that boxing became easier to regulate, promote, and standardize. A sport with gloves, timed rounds, and written fouls could be staged more consistently in clubs and arenas, which helped modern championship boxing develop. By the time fighters such as John L. Sullivan and James J. Corbett became major stars in the late 19th century, the sport was already moving into the Queensberry form. Corbett's 1892 win over Sullivan is often treated as one of the clearest turning points, because it symbolized the shift from the old bare-knuckle champion to the gloved heavyweight champion of modern boxing.